If Western Suburbs had lost the match, they would have dropped from 4th to 6th on the ladder. It was a critical game. But the Seagulls, also in the top 5, certainly weren't taking any backward steps. Lakes tried some enterprising moves, but the final vital pass always seemed to come unstuck. Brian Quinton, the former Knight, shone for Lakes, and the big prop, Sid Yates, for West. But it was the West backline which broke the Seagulls, sending speedy winger Jason Scheimer in the corner. Controversy in the second half. Lakes fullback Mark Mulligan was sent from the field for a head-high tackle. The final score, West 16, Lakes 6.
The vehicles were snapped up by a West Australian contractor at a basement price of $4 million. Many of the Wabcos and 85-tonners have been used in the now defunct Hebden mine and still have much of their 30,000-hour working lives ahead of them. They're headed for the West Australian goldfields, where financial returns have been less than shining lately, but where contractor Ivan Marsa sees profit for his company Civils.
We're showing a bit of confidence in the gold mining industry, and we believe there's a couple of years still left in there for the good operators like ourselves, I believe, and we're demonstrating our confidence by the cargo that we bought.
The combined weight of the cargo will be 2,000 tonnes. A special roll-on, roll-off ship, the Jumbo Callista, has been chartered for the job. It's due in port tonight.
Dancing for this group of performers is as much for joy as for preserving a rich history which goes back hundreds of years. Some of the dances performed by Black Umfolosi date back to the 10th century.
All the dances that we actually are going to do this evening all have got special significances. They are actually danced for special occasions. Some of them are, like we said, are danced to celebrate a victory. Some of them are danced to celebrate a big harvest. Some of them are danced after a successful hunt, and some of them are just danced at community gatherings.
But the group's performance tonight won't only include dance.
It really includes some traditional dances when we are dressed like this, putting on skins and things like that, as well as a cappella music, which we call it Imbube.
The group's only Newcastle show kicks off at the Civic Centre tonight at 8 o'clock.
Scrutineers at Maitland picked up where they left off, today counting postal and absentee votes. The winner of the seat in Maitland remains undecided. The result will now depend on preference votes. Late this afternoon, the Labor Party had dropped its lead on primary votes from 134 on Saturday night to only 44. Party scrutineers estimate that after the distribution of notional preferences, the Liberal Party is ahead by about 220 votes. There are only about 2,000 primary votes to count.
Well, I've moved from being quietly confident, I'm about to become quite noisily confident. I think we'll win it, frankly.
This afternoon, Shadow Attorney General Paul Whelan asked the Labor candidate for Maitland, Tony Keating, to attend a meeting with the ALP's legal advisors in Sydney.
Definitely Maitland and Tony will be one of the seats that we will be looking at if that challenge goes ahead within the courts, as a seat, of course, whose result would definitely be changed by a turnaround in the ruling.
Liberal MLC and scrutineer John Jobling believes the informal vote in Maitland equally disadvantaged both parties.
Frankly, in this election, no. I've had a chance to scrutineer the big booth at Rutherford, which is normally a strong Labor booth. I found as many of our people being declared informal with ticks and crosses as I found of theirs. The pre-poll this morning actually took more of ours out than took out of the Labor Party on that basis. So no, I don't think it's disadvantaged anybody.
Tomorrow they will either double-check the primary votes with a recount or get on with the job of distributing the official preferences. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
CSIRO has been studying the lake sedimentation problem for the past 5 years, but in this latest project, the team has been carefully examining indicators in the sediment, such as pollutants, to work out just how fast the silt is piling up. According to the CSIRO's Dr. Graham Bately, the rate is a fairly constant 6 millimetres a year. Dr. Bately says while the recent sediment is fairly clean, the lower layers of silt in the northern part of the lake are polluted with heavy metals from the days when the sulphide smelter went largely unchecked. And Lake Macquarie City Council's Environment Manager, Dr. Ron Kidd, admits that poses a dilemma.
On the one hand, we'd like to undertake some dredging to restore navigability and restore the aesthetics of that part of the lake. On the other hand, if we start dredging, we take the risk of mobilising some of the heavy metals which are at present locked up in those bottom sediments.
A major source of lake sedimentation is runoff from new subdivisions. Philip Geary, an environmental science lecturer at Newcastle University, says studies he did into temporary silt basins near Belmont Bay subdivisions showed them to be largely ineffective. Sedimentation is expected to be a major topic at a seminar called Lake Macquarie, an environmental reappraisal, to be held in Belmont on July 31st.
Bryson Henderson hasn't worked since 1986. A former ambulance officer at the Raymond Terrace station, he suffered severe spinal injuries while on the job.
They asked me to get a neighbour to help, which was the thing in those days. And I got a gentleman help me, and he dropped the end of his stretcher going down the front steps, and I rode the patient and the stretcher down the front steps.
14 of the 24 ambulances on call in the Hunter each day are manned by just one officer apiece. It's tough on them, but even worse for the patients who are often left alone in the back of the vehicle.
You're stopping and starting every 5 to 10 minutes, and in my time you was just told don't call for assistance, there's none.
Officers say even the new Kerry Packer donated heart starter machines are little use to a single-person crew because almost all training drills involve at least 2 people. Unions have called on the government to employ another 36 officers in the region.
The ambulance service is a service that requires 2 operators per unit, and finally bite the bullet and give the hunter and the people, the staff, the officers they deserve.
Health Minister Peter Collins today refused to comment on the issue, but newly appointed Regional Superintendent Reg Coburn admits he is concerned.
Well, the claims of mismanagement of patients is of concern to me, and in fact they're being investigated at this time.
Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
Police say Ms Grant worked as a stripper at numerous nightclubs in Brisbane's Fortitude Valley. Her body was discovered by council workers at the Greenbank tip south of Brisbane on Tuesday. Today, police exhibited grisly remains from the scene, including a flex cord and industrial plastic sheet used to wrap and bind the body. Also, a Jansen T-shirt which was tied around her head. The body had been badly burned, which is hampering a post-mortem investigation. Police say she suffered blows to the face and legs as well as a number of severe lacerations lacerations. They're seeking a taxi driver and a truck driver who may have given her a lift on the night before her body was discovered.
The Synod or Parliament of the Anglican Church in the Diocese of Newcastle addresses issues confronting the diocese and the world. Each year, Bishop Alfred Holland delivers a special message or charge to the Synod. This time, he highlighted the ordination of women priests.
70% of Anglicans in Australia believe that the ordination of women is the right way to proceed, and I think eventually such a huge majority will find its way to proceed with the ordination of women.
Locally, support is about the same. The matter is now before the Church's appellate tribunal. A decision is expected by August. According to Bishop Holland, wider issues also face society. He believes Australia's faith in its leaders has hit rock bottom and says it must be restored.
I think our trust in political leaders especially is at an all-time low. And I think this distrust of leadership goes right the way through the community, not just political leaders.
Well, how do you suggest our leaders improve their credibility?
It seems to me we require a spiritual renewal. Now, I'm not being religious in using that expression. I really believe that most of our problems have a spiritual basis. And if we can get the spiritual basis right, other things will flow.
It's one of the worst cases RSPCA Inspector John Carter has come across in 20 years on the job. The 2.5 hectare property had been picked bare of natural feed and there was little evidence of any attempt to provide hay or water to starving cattle.
When you look at this one here, whilst a lot of the farmers these days are battling with the drought and they're doing their best, but when you see this, it's absolutely disgusted. There's more feed on my desk than what's on this particular property at the moment, Andrew.
One cow lay dead and rotting in a shed. Another had dropped in its tracks and been covered by sheets of corrugated iron. It couldn't be saved. The property owner had been given a warning 2 months ago to reduce stock numbers during the drought and to clean up cluttered farm refuse dangerous to animals. According to the RSPCA, this was a blatant case of farm mismanagement.
And I give a warning right here and now, anybody else farming in the Hunter Valley or the Central Coast, if you're going to treat animals this way, you get what's coming to you, and that's facing prosecution under the Cruelty to Animals Act.
Like no war before it, the Gulf conflict was played out on television every day, but the members of the Newcastle Contemporary Artists Group were concerned that the war we saw was characterised by clean images, mostly free of dead bodies. So the group's latest exhibition, titled War Paint, attempts to redress the balance. The 47 works on display at the group's Wood Street Gallery show war as it is: brutal, tragic and bloody. Some of the 28 artists involved in the exhibition have portrayed the main players of the Gulf War. Others have shown the victims. Group chairperson Jean Eikamp says the artists have caught in images what people feel about war.
People were saying, you know, how can you just go on painting what you usually paint when the war was sort of there in your screens every day, in your televisions and in your radios and stuff like that.
The artists are also encouraging visitors to do some creative dabbling of their own. People can draw their images of war, which will be displayed in the gallery and perhaps later sent to the politicians in Canberra. War paint is on display each Friday, Saturday and Sunday until June 16th.
This is the vision the VFT joint venture has for southeastern Australia, a train which travels at 350 kilometres an hour, similar to those in Japan, France and Germany. Speaking at a businessman's lunch in Newcastle, joint venture chief executive Alan Castleman said, despite a careful response shown by some politicians, the $15 billion project will go ahead.
This isn't space age, this is just 20th century railways.
The venture, which is being funded by private enterprise, involves 3 stages, building new rail links between Sydney and Melbourne, Sydney-Brisbane and Melbourne-Adelaide. A station is planned for Newcastle around 2003. It's estimated a Newcastle to Melbourne trip would be less than 4 hours. From here to Brisbane, just 2 hours. But from Newcastle to Sydney is probably the most dramatic saving, a journey of just 37 minutes.
Newcastle and places like Albury, Wodonga and Wagga as well would experience much greater growth rate than before.
The VFT joint venture will be calling for public investors within 2 years. The group is now speaking with the federal government, looking at ways to minimise their tax load. Peter Ryan, NBN News. As the Newcastle Knights maintenance man and carpenter, Steve Fulmer knows you've got to keep hammering away to get the job done.
I've been trying to get my form back that I had last year, and in the last 3 weeks I thought that I've been getting back to that stage.
In 1990, Fulmer was one of the Knights' form players. The gritty halfback was 3rd in the Rothmans medal and was named in the Aussie train-on squad. But in 1991, injury put him out of the pre-season and former Dragon Steve Linnane took the prized number 7 jumper. The Knights have struggled in the last 3 games. Fulmer's running bursts and tight defence could give some much-needed spark. Gary Worth has kept his place in the side at fullback. Johnston, Doyle and Kemp are all under injury clouds and have been named as reserves. But for Steve Fulmer, after 10 weeks in reserve grade, he's sure to give his all this Sunday to impress selectors.
If I'm playing all right, I think they'd have to get me out with a crowbar.
Employees of NIB Health Fund, the building's major tenant, were back on the job today, but it wasn't quite business as usual, especially for morning tea.
It's a little bit nasty in there. We're only allowed in there to work, not to have morning tea.
On the 5th floor, where the blaze started, police and fire officers were sifting through the remains for clues.
Early indications are by the fire investigation unit that it could have possibly been a discarded cigarette. This has got to be totally confirmed at this stage.
Although the 5th floor was vacant and smoking is banned in the building, it had clearly been used as a smoking area. One NIB employee, Barry Howland, was close to death when he was trapped in a smoke-filled lift on the 5th floor when the fire was at its fiercest.
Mr. Howland said he could smell smoke from his 4th floor office. He decided to go to the 5th floor to investigate, but he used the lift, and fire officers say that could have been a fatal mistake.
The Fire Brigade advises, and actually it's also legislation, that in the event of fire, lifts are not used. In these circumstances that from yesterday's fire can be seen that Mr. Howland was extremely lucky to have escaped the fire. If he had to use the stairway, he wouldn't have been overcome as he was.
On the telephone from his hospital bed, Mr. Howland said he could hear an inferno on the other side of the lift doors, but he didn't think of death until smoke began choking him. According to one of his rescuers, Mr. Howland was lucky to live.
I wouldn't buy a lottery ticket if I was him. I think he's used all his luck.
Fire officers want to know why the lift jammed, even though it wasn't equipped with heat sensors.
Some of these lifts have sensors on them whereby that the doors do close and preventing the lift from moving from that floor. But we believe in this case that these didn't have sensors, and we're currently looking into this, the mechanism on this lift.
"24 hours of rain and wind haven't been enough to destroy evidence of the slick.
We're talking about when I was there between 1 and 3 yesterday afternoon. It was spread out over about 3 kilometres of the Hunter River.
Maitland Council health surveyors have questioned nearby factories but admit they are no closer to finding the culprits. Graham Larkman is certain it was a deliberate and irresponsible act.
I don't think there can be any doubt that it wasn't an accidental spill. The exact source may or may not be discovered, but considerable impact was caused by it, and one can only hope that something like this doesn't reoccur.
The Council and the State Pollution Control Commission have appealed to the public for information about the possible source of the slick. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
The Kings have found a new superstar in Dwayne McLean, and he was awesome. And the Falcons sported a new player, Troy Trevelyan from Perth, and he assisted James Bullock to a big dunk. Ahead by 11 at half-time, the Kings went further ahead through McLean and a big jam from second import Kenny McClary. Bullock was playing a solo hand for the Falcons while carrying a knee injury, and Trevelyan chimed in to show he's got plenty of talent. And Michael Johnson got the Falcons within 8 at the final change. Grant Kruger fouled out in dramatic circumstances. And Keogh again fired up for a long bomb to nail the win for the Kings and move them into the top 6.
Mr Jones, a former Minister for Science and now backbencher, is highly critical of how Australia has approached its export potential. Since Federation, he says we've tried to ride on the sheep's back and minerals boom. Meanwhile, the rest of the world has pushed ahead, leaving the lucky country in its dust.
We don't really understand how they operate, what they want, and the result is that as the demands in world trade change, we don't pick up the changes very quickly because we don't really quite understand what's going on.
Mr Jones puts it down to poor education, a she'll-be-right attitude and a lack of faith in research. This country, he says, must look to selling value-added products. He takes the case of wool. Australians sell a kilo of wool to Italy for $1.50. We buy it back as a designer jumper for $150.
Unfamiliar surroundings for an unfamiliar night's lineup. Wet weather caused the move to the sandy fields of Stockton. This harmless-looking tackle the absence of Robbie McCormack. A broken thumb could see him out for up to 8 weeks, and the exciting John Schuster a lot closer to the action in the centres.
Well, that's a possibility. You know, we'll just, as I said, have a look at that further on down the week. But John is certainly growing in stature week by week, and we're very pleased with his progress.
Coach McMahon has once again hedged his bets by naming a squad of 16. Miller, Kemp and Schuster could all fill the vacant wing and centre spots. Carter is favoured to win the hooking role ahead of Max Chapman, and Harrigan and Woods have been bracketed in the front row to make way for the return of Paul Marquette. Difficult for you as a coach to formulate a bit of a game plan with, as you say, you can only name a squad at this stage?
Well, you know, the basis is there, I suppose, so it's just trimming around the edges.
The selectors have shown faith in the likes of Gary Worth and Steve Fulmer, a move applauded by skipper Michael Hagan, who believes Fulmer in particular did enough to warrant his chance despite the good form of Steve Linnane.
Stevie Fulmer, I thought added a new dimension to our game, running from dummy half, and it's a very tough call, but I think Stevie Fulmer might be there next week.
Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.